Picking your main class in any game is hard, especially if you're like me and you just want to play all the things. So today we're going to go through all 5 Diablo 4 classes, their strengths, weaknesses, and a general overview of their playstyle to see if that class is right or wrong for you. Let's go! Let me know which class you're picking in the comments down below. We'll start with the Barbarian, and the Barbarian has unparalleled strength and expertly wields an entire arsenal in battle, which is no joke. They have 4 weapon slots and carry 2 one-handed weapons and 2 two-handed weapons. The whole kit here is based around those weapons. So because of that, really the big strength for the Barbarian is obviously melee damage as one, but they also have a high amount of just base health because of that being in melee range constantly. So if you're looking for a sort of a melee class, and even a class that maybe is a little bit more forgiving to play because of that, you know, a lot of their passives and stuff are based around damage reduction and a little bit of supporting around that as well, which conversely leads into their weaknesses, which is that they are primarily a short-ranged class. There is a little bit of range you can do with some movement-based things, but for the most part, they are a very close-ranged class that if you're looking to play range, this is definitely not the class for you. Their primary resource is Fury, and it works a little differently to some of the other classes in that you'll use your basic skills to build up Fury, and then you'll dump it with your core skills once you have enough Fury to actually cast it. A lot of the other classes work in a different way, which we'll talk about when we get to them, but for the most part, that is the general flow of the combat as a Barbarian, is using those basic skills to build up that Fury, and then using those core skills being your main damage dealers to dump that damage into enemies. There is a lot of flexibility in terms of the melee combat as a Barbarian, whether you're dual wielding or two-handing one or 2 of the different weapons that you do have, and you've got bludgeoning weapons and slashing weapons that will all affect in the way that you create your build, whether you're leaning into the bludgeoning or the slashing sort of things. And in terms of your class specialization, they are all based around that weapon expertise and which weapons they are using. And the more you use a weapon, the more you'll learn passives of that weapon. Say, for example, for the one-handed axe, when you learn how to use them better, you'll get a critical strike chance increase against injured enemies for using axes. So you really want to lean into whatever your weapon expertise is and then base your skills around that. But to recap here, this is a tanky, melee-focused class with a ton of weapon to use. Next is the Rogue, and the Rogue is an adaptable, agile warrior who can specialize in ranged or close quarters combat, and that is their core strength. It is that versatility. They are also a very mobile class with a whole skill tree based around different movement abilities, and you've also got plenty of traps that you can apply, and as well as imbuing your weapons with different types of damage, whether that be cold, shadow, or poison. So there is a lot of flexibility here. Now, the weaknesses to the Rogue, I would say really is that they're not very resilient in terms of damage. They're a little bit squishy, and you can definitely get stuck sometimes, whether you're playing either a ranged or a melee rogue and taking a lot of damage that you probably should try and avoid. They can be challenging to play as well because of that real amount of freedom in whether you're going into a melee or a ranged or a hybrid sort of situation, as well as the traps and how to utilize those traps and where to place them, or the imbuing of weapons and which imbuements you should use and how they interact with different abilities. There is a lot to the Rogue. Now, the Rogue's main resource is energy, and energy is basically a straight resource that you will generate via your basic skills, but you will typically have 100 energy at the start, and then you dump that energy in with your core skills and it will regenerate over time. I think because of the flexibility in the Rogue, especially if you understand some action RPGs, sort of general systems and mechanics, the Rogue is a really good choice because of that flexibility, and for me personally, the Rogue's my favorite class because you have that freedom to switch between melee and ranged and create completely different builds, whereas something like, just touching on the Barbarian again, you're really just going to be some sort of a melee character, whereas the Rogue, you could be completely ranged, you could be completely melee, somewhere in the middle. There's also other ways you can build out that character. There is a lot of that freedom, but that does make it hard to find a really successful build without that sort of core knowledge. But the Rogue is definitely a class that you can see a really good amount of success with, that if you are looking for something that you're not sure whether you want to be melee or ranged or somewhere in the middle, the Rogue is a good choice if you don't want to get into some of the more unique classes, which are the last 3 that we're going to cover here. The Sorcerer is next, and the Sorcerer shapes the elements into whatever form is necessary to ensure victory by hurling bolts of lightning, impaling her foes with jagged spikes of ice, and raining flaming meteors down from the sky. And that is the core of the Sorcerer. Think of them like a mage that are really wielding different elemental powers to deal elemental damage to enemies. While there is some melee range sort of attacks as a Sorcerer, your key focus here really as a Sorcerer and key strength is that long range potential, plus the crowd control and status effects that you can apply with all these different elemental attacks. And they do typically typically have a high amount of damage because of that. They can be considered a bit of a glass cannon, which can in turn make them challenging to play because of that low health pool and being less effective up close. And especially if you're playing in solo play and everything just wants to run at your face, it does make it a little challenging. There are ways you can mitigate this by generating barriers from some of the basic attacks, but for the most part, it's just something that you need to be aware of. The main resource for the sorcerer is mana, which is regenerated over time rather than through your basic skills, though there are ways to increase this. But in general, a sorcerer is someone looking to deal elemental damage with fire, cold, or lightning, that sort of thing. If you're looking to play the sorcerer, you're really looking at sort of a long-range elemental damage focus build, looking into some crowd control, which makes it a really strong co-op class, especially if your homie is playing something like a melee class, like a Barbarian. There's a lot of synergy between this class and some of the other classes. The Necromancer is next. Now, this is one of the most unique classes in the game. The Necromancers are really a summoner that can conjure vengeful hordes of the undead, and they use those minions to fight for them. They're not useless though. They can also fight for themselves, and instead of actually summoning minions, you can transfer that energy into yourself if you so choose. But they're unique not only in the summoning of undead creatures, but they sort of have two resources. So Essence is like their main resource, which you'll use as you dump your core abilities, but corpses are also a critical part of Necromancers, more or less regardless of your build. So when you defeat an enemy, you'll see a corpse on the ground as a Necromancer, and it's really up to you what you're doing with this depending on your build, whether you're then summoning that as a minion or say exploding it to deal damage or various other things. It's all about that corpse mechanic as well as the essence and how you choose to interact with those and your minions. Because of that, the core strength here is that army of minions and being able to avoid damage or aggro because of those minions and having them sort of protect you in some regard, which makes them an easier class to play, especially in solo play because you've already got that sort of backup help. But the big weakness here is that you're sort of stuck with that specific Necromancer playstyle, and it's all revolving around those minions as well as that class specialization to do with it. So while the Necromancer is really fun and there's a lot that you can do here and the different types of minions you can summon, as well as if you're even choosing to summon them and if you just want to use it differently, there is a lot of fun to be had whether you're a solo or a co-op player as a Necromancer, but it may not be for you because you are forced into those systems. You know, we talked about with the rogue that you can go melee or ranged, and sorcerers, for example, have different types of elemental damage that they could do. And with a Necromancer, it's all revolved around the undead sort of mechanic. So if you don't like that sort of a setup, then you may struggle as a Necromancer player and you may want to look at something else, potentially like the Druid, which is a main shapeshifter here. So the Druid can shapeshift into either a werebear or a werewolf or anything in between, as they can really command the elements of earth, wind, and storm as well in their human form. But the unique mechanic for the Druid is the ability to shapeshift, and that happens on your attack. So you don't have to shapeshift via a separate ability. It really happens automatically when you trigger an attack, whether that be into a bear or werewolf, or even if you choose to stay on your human form and actually use those elements to your control. A key strength really for the Druid is the versatility into how you want to play, as whether you want to be a shapeshifter or stay on your human form. And they're also fairly resistant because of the different forms they can take, whereas a werebear is, maybe you could consider it sort of like a tanky sort of a setup, and the werewolf is a little bit more DPS focused, but that is dependent on your build. They also have some really solid crowd control abilities, as well as being able to apply different status effects. The downside to the Druid is that they are a little limited in terms of their ranged options unless you're staying in your human form, which is sort of, if you were staying on your human form and you were liking that a little bit more, maybe the Sorcerer is for you because they're sort of similar in that setup. But as a Druid, you really, in my opinion, should be leaning into the shapeshifting setups because that's what makes them unique. The main resource for the Druid is Spirit, which is generated by your basic attacks, and then you obviously consume it with your core skills. So when you're looking at all of these classes, which class is best? And the answer here really is like none. It's a very nuanced conversation, right? So each class is going to be strong or weak in any particular category, and that's the purpose of classes. But if you're looking for me to tell you like what is the most overpowered class, in my opinion, that shouldn't matter to you. What should matter to you is the class that you find fun to play, because what is considered the most overpowered class or build right now in Diablo 4 is absolutely going to change in subsequent patches as things get buffed and nerfs and legendary aspects get added or changed or removed, etc. And just over time, that will change. So what I would recommend to you is to find the the class playstyle that you vibe with the most and lean into that rather than listening to what the internet tells you is the most broken OP build and trying to find that potential. For me, the rogue is what I love the most because of that flexibility of melee and range, as well as the overall damage potential and that burst, like critical damage that they can do. I find that really satisfying, though I am also a fan of like the Druid and the shapeshifting. For newer players, I would suggest something like a Barbarian or a Necromancer because of the ease of playing that we sort of talked about in this video. And if you're, say, looking for something that is better sort of in a solo play, the Necromancer definitely fits that sort of category, but then the Rogue and Sorceress squishiness make them a little hard to either play in solo or even for newer players of a action RPG like this. But let me know in the comments what class you are playing and any tips you have for the classes. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.